We're going to talk about how you can get the most out of your manual. And when you do all this hard work, you may as well get as much as you can out of it. We'll talk about what to include, what not to include. We'll talk about putting one together, some tips on making it more user-friendly, updating it. And then, towards the end, because, I love best practices, we'll talk about best practices, but also some worst practices. And with that, let's, dive right in, if you will, and let's get started. So I want to be clear about what we're talking about. It is a written document, and, I use the word written kind of loosely. It does not necessarily have to be printed, a PDF version, or even a Word document online. A digital copy is fine, and it should delineate, obviously, your policies and procedures. Now, one point I want to make is that it's documenting what you actually do, not what you think you should be doing. So you want to make sure that that's what it covers, and it does not talk about theoretical best practices. So you may put something in there that you know is not a best practice, you would love to change, but you haven't changed. And so you kind of stuck with it in the policy and procedures manual. And let me explain why that's so important. One of the things that we're going to talk about that this policy and procedures manual can be used for is a roadmap. So consider this situation. Everybody in the AP department chips in and buys some lottery tickets together. A lot of groups do that. And then you're the lucky 1 in a million or 1 in 300 million, and your group wins, and you win one of those big prizes, and the whole department quits. And so your company would really be left high and dry if it were not for the fact that your AP manual spells out in excruciating detail, actually in this case, exactly what you do and how you do it, etc. So that's one of the uses of the policy and procedures manual, and that's why it's so important that it document actual processes. But it's not set in stone. Things change, as I'm sure you're all painfully aware. And as things change, and as like you adopt new technology, or there's a new fraud, or there's a new regulatory requirement, as these things change and your department takes on these tasks, you need to update the manual to reflect the work as it is actually being done. So we did a survey about the state of policy and procedures manuals, because I'm going to be perfectly honest, this is one of those tasks that, it's like, not eating too much sugar, getting enough exercise, getting enough sleep, etc. We all know that we should have an updated one, but it tends to get backburnered, especially when there's more pressing work to be done. And so you can see here that when it comes to, updated, complete and thorough policy and procedures manual, less than 20% actually have one that is updated, complete, thorough, etc. Most of us are somewhere else on that spectrum. So when we talk about manuals, what we're not talking about is a collection of memos or handwritten notes or instructions that you wrote out real quickly in a Word document and then you print it out. Okay, sometimes you'll hear people refer to them as desk memos when it just refers to one particular task that's very detailed oriented. Okay, but that's not what we mean, and it's definitely not oral. There's been a lot of change in AP, so we don't hear now the way we used to hear all the time, oh, well, that's the way we always did it, because the way we always did it no longer works, and most of us are not doing things the way we always did it past. So we have what I call crisis management, and the big crisis that we had is COVID. Hopefully that's passed, and hopefully we won't have anything like it. But from time to time, you'll have situations where there might be a hurricane or a tornado in your area, or a bad snowstorm, Mother Nature event of some sort. Or I come from New York. It's been a long time, but way back when there were periodically train strikes. There still are, but they went on for a period of time. So you have to adjust for those situations, and you also need to address them in your policy and procedures manual, mainly referring to what the company will reimburse for and what the company won't reimburse for. Now, as I've indicated, and we talked a little bit in our first question, there's now the issue of remote work. before COVID, the issue of remote work, or working from home, we referred to it more completely then, was rare. Okay. And, the few accounts payable departments whose people were able to work at home maybe one day a week, that was a real benefit. But, what happened? COVID hit. We all worked from home, or many of us worked from home. And now it has become a real issue in hiring. People are all over the map on this. Some people like to go into the office. And I want to acknowledge that. Not everybody wants to work from home, but a lot of people do, or at least partially. And, it's a big issue. I will point out that if you are willing to let people work from home, at least part-time, in a significant way, like 1 or 2 days a week, but if you let them work from home 4 days a week and come into the office one day, you're going to greatly expand your pool of potential hires, because there are quite a few people out there who want to work from remotely. So this is, just one more dimension in an already difficult hiring situation. But if you're allowing for it, and like we saw in the first question we asked, ideally you do have a policy for reimbursing expenses when folks are working remotely. Either you do or you don't. I'm not saying what's the right way to do it, but ideally you have a policy and it's set in stone and everybody gets treated the same way. The same thing with what technology the company will pay for. In many instances, especially before COVID, the companies would say, okay, you can work from home 1 day a week if you want, but we're not buying you any technology. You have to use what you have. And while from an expense, bottom line standpoint, that may have seemed like a good solution, it ignored the fact that a lot of times that technology at home wasn't as good, wasn't as fast, didn't have the fraud protections included in it. So it's not as black and white an issue as management would like us to believe. So you just have to say. Also, with remote working, you have to address the issue of printing checks if you are still printing checks. And I know basically most of you are. Some of you may have outsourced that function to your bank, in which case this is not as big an issue. But when you're talking about expense reimbursements, you can mandate ACH. I know in many states you can't mandate ACH for payroll checks, but you can for reimbursement. So another issue just to put inside. So with remote working, there are some additional problems. You want to address it. Some different changes, by the way, in how your tasks will be handled, how the day-to-day policy and procedures are, and you just want to make sure that you delineate them and you work it out. And of course, dealing with questionable reimbursement fees. So ideally, you'll have updated your policy to reflect this, or your company will have a separate working from home or remote work policy. That's the ideal situation because then everybody is treated the same way. Ideally, it conforms to IRS guidelines, which means it's fair. Everybody gets treated the same way. And I just want to point out that if your organization is allowing employees to pay for items with their own credit cards, and then you have to be especially aware of returned items and getting those refunds back. Okay, COVID really highlighted that issue for us. And if you are one of those companies where your staff, your accounts payable staff is unionized, and there are a few of them. It's not a preponderance, but there are situations where the AP staff is unionized. You want to make sure that whatever you put in your policy is not going to get you in trouble with the union. Okay, so you want to conform to that. And one last thing I want to talk about, and hopefully this does not impact many of you, but if you're allowing your folks to work remotely and you're saying we won't reimburse for certain expenses, you want to make sure that your staff is still earning above minimum wage, because that's the last piece of trouble that you need. Now, for most of you, your salaries are high enough that this will not be an issue. But I want to just go over a little bit of math. 10 states now have minimum wages of $15 or higher, and so do a few cities. In fact, in a few cities, it's even higher than $15. So if you do the math, $15 an hour times $40 hours a week is $600, which is $31,200 a year. So if your staff is making significantly more than that, or even a little bit more than that, just ignore, you don't have to listen to me for the next 30 seconds. But if your staff is around that number, be very careful about asking them to buy technology out of their own pocket, etc. Because you don't want to run into trouble with the minimum wage laws. Okay, so how are you going to get the most out of your manual? You put a lot of hard work into putting this manual together, so you want to make sure that you get as much out of it. It should be the roadmap for how your accounts payable function operates. And I like to say, in theory, it's the Bible for your accounts payable processes. Okay, it's the last word. So when somebody doesn't know how to do something, they can go and look it up. So how are you going to get the most out of it? You can do a number of things with it. We've already talked about it being the documentation and how if you won the lottery, it's there as a roadmap or a guide for those who are left behind. It documents everything as you're doing it. But you can also use it as a training tool or a reference guide. It can help you with your auditors, and then if you've come up with any other ideas, then hopefully you will share them with us in the comments. So let's talk about the documentation, which I'm going to go through quickly because I've already talked about it a bit, but it's the last word. And what you periodically want to do is, yes, you've got this document, yes, you've trained everybody, but periodically you want to sit with your processes and you want to make sure that they are doing what the manual says. And if they're not, then you're kind of at the fork in the road. You want to figure out if the way they are doing it is actually better, in which case then you want to change the manual and train everybody to do it in this better way that they're doing it. Or is it maybe making their job a little bit easier, but weakening controls or creating problems for someone else down the road, and you need to correct them and have them go back to the way that they see is more onerous, but is better for the organization as a whole. And unfortunately, when you find people doing things with their own shortcuts, it's usually the latter. You can also use it as a training guide for new employees. And when I say using it as a training guide, I'm not saying, get a new employee, their first day, they come in that morning and you hand them the manual and say, here you are, good luck, and you're on your own. I'm not talking about that. Yes, you do want to give them a copy of the manual, but then you want to go through your normal training, and with the idea that they can maybe follow along in the manual if you want, or just they can focus on the training with the understanding that they've got this manual, so they don't have to take copious notes, write everything down because it's all there for them in the manual. But of course, that only works if the manual is up to date. By the way, just a hint, you can check and make sure your manual is up to date if you get a new employee and you're working through their training, and you can go through the manual at the same time and make sure it is updated. You can also use it as a reference guide. In some organizations, the manager has been there for quite some time, and they know everything about how the organization is supposed to operate, and you can ask them anything and they'll just pop off the answer. But of course, when you do that, you're not making the staff self-sufficient, and all that they're doing is becoming completely reliant on the manager. So a better way, if you have an updated policy and procedure, is to tell them, get the policy and procedures manual out and look it up. This goes a long way towards making the staff more self-reliant. And that old saying about give a man a fish, you feed him for a day. Teach him how to fish, you feed him for the rest of your life. This will make the manager more efficient, and it will also free up up the manager to work on other projects, more value-add projects. You especially want to use it as a reference guide for those tasks that come up infrequently, those once a year tasks, maybe the 1099s, maybe you do an annual report for the board of directors, whatever it is you want to document it in there. And I like to say you can use it to help get the auditors off your back. Now, you need to do two things before you try and take this approach. Number one, you need to make sure that the manual conforms to what you are actually doing. And number two, you need to make sure that the manual conforms to what you're supposed to be doing. So if you're using it, for example, for IRS TIN matching or for 1099 reporting, you want to make sure that you're doing everything that the IRS says. If it's for something at the state level, maybe sales and use tax or some other state reporting requirement, then make sure it is useful for that, etc., etc. Now, so then when the auditor comes in, remember it documents what you're doing, and it is what you're supposed to be doing. This is one time when it's important that it actually reflects best practices. Then when the auditor comes in, you can hand them the manual and you can say, here, this is what they're doing. They look through the manual and say, oh, yeah, it is what they're doing, what they're supposed to be doing, or it says they are. Let me see if they are. And then they sit with one person for a few hours. They see that they're doing it right, and hopefully they leave. Emphasis on the word hopefully. So other ways that you can use it. The policy and procedures manual, for the most part, isn't a secret document. What I like to say, though, is if you're spot checking, then spot checking expense reports, expense reimbursement requests, that part of the manual you don't want to share with other departments. Also, if you're doing any checking to make sure that there is no employee fraud going on, you could keep that. Should be a little bit of a secret. But when it comes to interactions with other departments, things like cutoff schedules for when they need to get invoices turned in so they get paid within a certain payment run, etc., then you can share it with other departments. What I like to tell people is just print a page or two to a PDF, a relevant page or two. Because if you give them the whole manual, their eyes are going to glaze over. And I don't blame them. Who wants to read a policy and procedures manual if you don't have to? But you can use it to just share these little snippets of information that way. Okay, let's turn our attention now to what we want to include in the manual and what we don't want to include. So I can't reiterate this enough. The manual needs to reflect the work that's actually being done, and it should be step-by-step instructions that even a novice can follow. Don't assume anything. Many times it's the manager who puts the manual together, and that manager has worked for the organization a long time, and they've just got this wealth of knowledge that's kind of like in the back of their mind that kind of lives with them. And so there are certain things that they just do automatically. You need to make sure that you include all that stuff you do automatically, because somebody coming in fresh who hasn't worked for your organization is not going to know all that stuff. So for example, if you pull a certain report, you need to tell them where that report comes from, because a new person isn't going to want to know that, even though you know that, hey, it says finance, but we get it from the guy in treasury. Little bits of pieces of information like that. So don't assume anything. Now, a lot of times, that old saying, a picture's worth 1,000 words, within limits it is when it comes to policy and procedures manual. So sometimes screenshots are good, but you don't want to go overboard. I'm sure you've seen manuals that are, 3 inches thick. They're in a big binder, and you start looking through them, and there's picture after picture, there's screenshots, and they all look the same. And when you look closely, there's a little difference, on one, the, A is checked off, and on the second one, B, but there's not much different. So include screenshots where they can really help. But don't go overboard, because it's like writing long paragraphs. After a while, people's eyes start to glaze over. So when you're putting your manual together, you want to make sure that you use titles, not names. And why is this? Because people leave. And if it says Mary Jones in there, and then Mary Jones leaves and Jim Smith comes in, but Jim knows Mary left, so he's okay with it. But then Jim leaves and Teresa comes in. Well, Mary's long gone, and Teresa never heard of her, and so Teresa doesn't realize she's supposed to be doing whatever it is. If you can have hard cutoff dates, put the hard cutoff dates in there wherever applicable, especially when it comes to deadlines for month end and year end closes, if you can. Now, sometimes the deadline is something like, 7 business days before the end of the month. And you can't put the hard date in there because, it depends upon if there's weekends, where weekends fall. But if you can, put it in there. And remember, you're going to share some of this stuff with people outside AP, so don't assume that people automatically know what you do. And this is especially true when it comes to cutoff schedules, things like IRS guidelines for expense reimbursements, 1099s, etc. So your shareable pages are these things that you want other people to read that you can print to a PDF. Again, cutoff dates, parts of your expense reimbursement policy, documentation requirements. That's an especially good one from publication 463 that you get from the IRS, W-9 requirements, and anything that's related to common questions or errors that people seem to be making over and over again. Now, we want to include everything that's done in AP. So you want to include anything that's handled there. If somebody in accounts payable is responsible for, the United Way campaign, you might want to include that in there. Yeah, it's not part of the regular stuff, but you might want to include it in the end. Whatever craziness there is. Your expense reimbursement policy, what's done in AP needs to be handled in your policy and procedures manual. Now, there'll be the policy part, which you'll share with all employees. That does not actually have to be in the accounts payable policy and procedures manual. You might put it in as an addendum, okay? And any documentation requirement. And again, we talked about there are certain things you don't have to share with people outside. Do you do W-9s? Are you responsible for collecting W-9s and verifying them on IRS TIN matching? Well, most of you probably are. That should be included. Are you responsible for issuing 1099s? That should be included. Okay. And again, don't forget the IRS requirements. You might have addendums in there that are additional information that is discretionary. It's nice to have, but it's not included. So, for example, many folks will have in the addendums publication 463 if they have their expense reimbursements in there. That's from the IRS. The IRS mileage rate with the announcement when it comes out, etc. You also might have, some addendums regarding once a year tasks, etc. Or you might have nothing, okay? It just depends. Some don't include it. Okay, so now we want to get started. So there's 2 ways that you can put together a policy and procedures manual, assuming you have nothing. Number 1, you can borrow someone else's, or number 2, what I call the outline approach. You can start with an outline. Now, before you automatically say, oh, well, this is a no-brainer, we'll borrow somebody else's, bear with me. Okay, so where are you going to borrow them? Where are you going to borrow it from? Well, if you're lucky, you have a friend who's in a similar industry, and you can ask them for theirs, because if they're in a similar industry, you may, an emphasis on the word may, have a similar policy. Or you can go online and you can do a search, and you can just put expense reimbursement policies, travel and expense policies, things like that, sample travel policy, and you'll find, especially colleges and universities, many of them have it online, or you can purchase one. Although, to be honest, it's been a while since I've seen any for sale, but maybe there is. Now, let's start off with borrowing someone else's, which might seem ideal. Once you borrow it, what do you need to do? You need to, first of all, go through it and go through the content, what's missing and what doesn't apply to you. So, especially if you're getting an expense reimbursement policy from a college and university, you'll have a lot of things in there about grants. If your organization doesn't get grants, then obviously you want to take that out. And there may be some other things in there that doesn't apply to your organization. Okay, so you take all that stuff out. What's missing? Well, if it's a college and university and you're a manufacturing organization, for example, they're going to have many parts. They're not going to have many parts that you need that relate to the manufacturing process. Once you've got your content in order, you have you've taken out the necessary stuff, you've added the stuff that you have to, then you need to go through and you need to change all the names and titles because they're going to be different in your organization. The numbering sequence, because a lot of policies are numbered, section A, section B, etc. And any other references that there might be in there. You're going to have to change addresses. They probably use different names, different titles than you do, different departments than you do. At the end of the day, even though this sounds like it's a simpler approach, it's a lot more work than you might think. Now, you can also create one from scratch. You can get an outline of all topics to be covered, or you can make one yourself. I have one. If you need it, just drop me an email. And then once you've got the list of topics, you go through it. What's missing? Is there something on here that we do that Mary didn't have on the list? Or what doesn't apply? Oh, we don't do 1099s. Let me cross that off. Okay. You want to review this list of topics with all impacted parties. We're not writing it at this time. We're just reviewing it with all impacted parties. I can tell you the outline that I have it's about 3 pages long. Ask for input, what should we include? And don't be overwhelmed. At this point, it's just an outline. Now, once you've got your outline completed of topics to be covered, you need to figure out how you're going to do this. You can assign it to one person as a special project. I can tell you I've worked in a number of organizations where it has been assigned to somebody as a special project, and I have never seen it completed. If you have, I'd love to hear from you, but I have never seen it completed, because think about this. If you give someone an outline and ask them to write this for you, you are essentially asking them to write a book. How many people do you know that have written a book? Maybe you know 1 or 2, but okay. So it's unlikely to be completed, and not only that, it's unlikely that this one person has all the knowledge about all the different functions. So a better way, in my humble opinion, is to make this a group project. And so let's say you have 10 people in your accounts payable department, okay? I'm using 10 because, I can do the math real easy in my head. And so what you want to do is you want to take your outline. And so let's say we had 30 sections. I'm making it a small manual. We have 30 sections, 10 people. Now each person is going to get 3 sections, okay? Already it's starting to look a little bit easier. What you want to do is give them guidelines and possibly even a sample section. So you might pick one section, hint, pick the one you know the best, that you can do the fastest, and write it up. And then you want to give it to them so they can see what you're looking for. When your first draft is completed, and you want to set deadlines, okay? So, each person's got their 3 sections to write up, and the deadline is May 1st, and you might remind them on April 25th. They'll all hand it in. You get it all, and then you're going to want it reviewed. Now, you got to be really strong with people here. When you tell them when they're reviewing it, you give it to somebody else who, actually would be able to review it because they know what's being done there. Make it clear to them that they are reviewing for accuracy only. They are not to rewrite it. And they're just looking for accuracy, because inevitably you'll have some people who think they're brilliant writers. And in my experience, the people who go and try and rewrite other people's stuff are not always the best writers. I'll just be nice and leave it there. And people's feelings get hurt. So no rewriting, just is this correct? If yes, then you don't do anything to it. If no, then they should go back and discuss it with the person who originally wrote it, and if they come to an agreement, fine. If they don't, then the manager will get involved. Sometimes when two people can't agree on the way that something's being done, it's because they're doing it differently, and it's the same task, and then the manager should get involved, see which way we should be doing it, update the documentation to do that. And this is another chance for you to find an instance where someone's not following your policies and procedures, and you can then resolve that. Okay. Now you want to create a final document. Unfortunately, what you now have is a document that was written by 10 different people, and everybody writes a little bit differently. One of the biggest compliments I got was when I wrote my first book and I gave it to my sister to read, and she said, "It sounds like you." And I was like, good, because that's how I wanted to come across. But now you have 10 people who each of their sections sounds like them, and they don't sound like each other. So you want to do a light editing job, not huge, but light. Obviously, you want to correct any grammatical errors. You want the formatting to be done the same. And so this should be done by one person, maybe the manager, etc. Sometimes you'll have a new hire, you'll let them do it. And I know of a few cases where the company actually hired somebody, a professional writer, to come in and fix it. If you do that, though, make sure you go over what they give you back, and that is what you gave them, because occasionally people get carried away and then they introduce errors into it, which is why we make such a big thing about light editing. And if it sounds like 3 different people, well, so be it. It sounds like 3 different people. It's a policy and procedures manual. You're not looking to win any writing prize with this. The final manual should have a cover on it, should be shared with everyone. And you want to give credit in the beginning of the manual to everybody who participated. So you might say, we'd like to, this work was created by, and we'd like to thank, and list everybody's name out in alphabetical order, etc. And include the date, okay? So how are we going to make this user-friendly? Again, we don't want to be overwhelmed. You probably have 30 to 50 sections, possibly more, and you want to look at it as a series of small projects or memos. Sometimes people will say, well, I could never write a book. And my answer to that is, do you write memos at work? Yes. Well, think of each memo, if you will, as a small chapter. So by focusing on the small pieces separately, rather than the whole thing, it becomes a more manageable process. And it will build confidence. So here's what you do. So everybody gets assigned their sections. Okay, they don't have to be written in order. That's one of the beauties of an outline. And each person should start with the easiest section, okay? And the first time, just write out the steps. Don't worry about your grammar, etc. Just write out the steps. Tying, boiling water. Get a cup, step 1. Step 2, put water in the cup, step 2. Step 3, put it in the microwave or stove, etc. Just write the steps out in order. Again, not worrying about the grammar. Once you've got all your steps written out, you might go back and write a short introduction, emphasis on the word short, and if needed, a short concluding sentences, but only if needed. Put it aside, you're done. Next day, go back, review it briefly. Is it complete? Is it complete? Did I leave anything out? Is it consistent? Is my grammar correct? And then leave it, okay? Or do I have run-on sentences maybe? Because if you're Mary Schaefer, you always have run-on sentences. Then you want to go back and fix them. That's it. Move on to the next section. Then what happens is you've done all the sections, but the one that you've been dreading doing, it's the 1099s. Let's say you're going to write, you've been assigned that, and you've been dreading it. Well, you've done everything else. So now it's not the stumbling block holding you back. It's the from getting started. It's as soon as I get this done, then I'm done. And it's much easier to do at that point. Yes, it's kind of annoying. I'm going to be perfectly honest. When you get to that last point and the only thing you have left is the thing that you can't stand, it's like having your broccoli left after you ate. And if you don't like broccoli, I do, but if you don't like broccoli, at the end of the meal, but it's a lot easier to get done then. So you want to make your policy as readable as possible. So it's important not to assume that the readers know everything that you do. Use lots of bullet points and steps, step 1, step 2, step 3, or just, bullet points, using short sentences and short paragraphs. It is much easier to understand. It's much easier to follow through if you're trying to do something and read it. It says, get the cup, you go and get the cup. Put the water in, and it's just much easier. And if you've used a lot of abbreviations, which I hope you haven't, consider having an abbreviation policy. We've already talked about using titles instead of names, but this, just be aware, sometimes can be a problem. So for example, if you had a director of accounts payable and the policy is written up and it says, director does this, director does that, etc., and that person moves on and somebody else gets the job and they don't have nearly as much experience, management might decide, what, we're going to give them the title of manager instead of director, or maybe assistant director, or whatever it is. It's not exactly the same, and it makes it difficult then to use the policy. So you just have to be careful if that happens, but it's certainly better than using it, okay? Include dates where applicable, and you want to include as many pages that can be printed to a PDF with as much shareable information that's needed. So things to avoid. Can probably figure out most of this. Long sentences, long paragraphs, extra information, extraneous information. Nobody cares about how you used to do it. If you feel that's important, put it in a document in the addendum, but don't include it in the body of the document. Be very careful about jargon. Don't assume everybody knows, because everybody doesn't. One of my favorite examples is I talk about, and I've done it today, but hopefully you all know that when I say T&E, I mean travel and entertainment. But inevitably, if I'm talking to a group of accountants, there'll be somebody who raises their hand and says, what's T&E? Oh, I did it again. All right. We talked about avoiding people's names in the Policy and Procedures Manual. And what we haven't talked about is underlining. The reason you don't underline is because, when you're trying to emphasize something, people might think it's a hyperlink. The same thing actually with making it bold, although there's less of a chance that they would think it was a hyperlink with bolding it, but still be careful. And of course, sensitive information. You don't want to put that in the Policy and Procedure Manual. You want to have a table of contents. Now, one thing about the table of contents, you may notice that it looks very much like your outline. And if your outline was good, you can just do a little maneuvering on your outline and turn it into a table of contents. Maybe change a few of the wordings. But if you do, it makes your Policy and Procedures Manual more user-friendly. You have invoices on one section, payments, 1099s, or whatever your chapter are. And if you have page numbers, which most of you probably will, make sure the page numbers are updated whenever the content is updated. Because if you add even one page or take out even one page, it's going to throw your table of contents page numbering off. And of course, you want to show the date of the last update. So you might want to have, we talked about when you're asking people to do this, you might want to have a format that you give them. And the format might say title, processing checks, printing checks, whatever the title is of the little individual section, a number if you're numbering sections, and you might tell people don't put that in, we'll put it in at the end. You have all of it together. If there's an effective date, you might want to put that in. We see that especially with mileage reimbursement rates when the IRS changes that, if that's in your manual. The date of the last revision, who they should go to for questions if they have a question about something. And then some people will put in reviewed by and approved by. You may or may not want to do that. That, it's an individual preference. Should the manual be printed? That basically is a personal preference. You can produce it as a PDF This makes it easier to maneuver and share with as many people as possible, but some people do prefer to have a printed document. And in fact, I'm going to be honest, I thought nobody was printing their policy and procedures manual. And we were doing one webinar on here. Some of you may have been on it with Lynn Lawson when she was talking about P-card policy and procedures manuals. And we asked how many people had them printed. And I was flabbergasted because I thought everybody was going to come back and say they didn't have a printed copy. And a third of the people had a printed copy. So if you print yours, know that you're not alone. And by the way, a lot of times those printed copies are printed by the end user themselves, not the company printing it and giving out a printed copy. Okay, so now you got the policy. It's great. It's a wonderful document, but it's not good forever. What you need to do is you need to update it. When do you update it? Whenever you make a change, ideally. This is from a best practice standpoint. If you don't update it every time you make a change, the document gradually becomes worthless. And here's what happens. Even though we say, hey, you should review the policy and procedures manual once a year to make sure all the updates were put through, and organizations have the best of intentions. They're going to go through, they're going to update it. They don't. And so what happens is either they forget or I'm really busy. We've got month end. As soon as we get past month end, I'll go back and I'll update it. And they forget. And then the annual review, same thing. There's always something more important to do than to go through the policy and procedures manual and make sure all the updates were put through. And then the next thing you know, it's 5 years and 25% of the manual is out of date, and it's worthless because you don't know what's accurate and what's not. So don't let that happen to you. So when you do the annual review, before you even look at the thing, think about, have we had any problems that could have been addressed by a process change? This is a good time to do it if you can. Then you also want to think about what's changed in the last year. And before you get to go to say nothing, have you started using any new technology? Have you started making ACH payment when you weren't before? Have you adopted an invoice automation module? Was there a new fraud that you had to change your processes to protect against? As we had to, for example, when we started doing all those verifications to make sure those change of email address, bank account, those emails regarding change of bank accounts, are they all act? So you'll start to go through and you'll find stuff like that. You'll make your list and then you go through and make sure the policy and procedures manual was updated to address those issues. Okay, reality check. When do people check, or do they? And you can see the best practice here is whenever there's a change, plus once a year, done by less than 20% of the survey participants. So when do you do this review? You want to put it on the schedule and you want to make it a regular part of your schedule. So just like you go through year end at whatever the end of your fiscal year is and you have your little tasks, your big tasks, and you do 1099s in January, you want to pick a time when every year you're going to go through the policy and procedures manual. And in fact, you're going to write it in as part of your policy and procedures manual. And when do you want to do that? Whenever you're less busy. So if you have a fiscal year end of December 31st, maybe that's the summer. If your fiscal year end is June 30th, it's probably not the summer. But you want to figure out when your group is least busy and then do it at that time. And ideally, you want to make it a multi-party review rather than one person reviewing it because, if it's group tasks, you can all do it pretty quickly. But if one person is doing it, A, they may not know of all the changes, and B, it'll take forever. So one kind of fun thing to do is get everybody in the conference room, and either you bring in your lunch or you get a pizza, and then you all sit down together. You take an hour or two, however long it's quiet, and you go through to make sure it's been updated. And, that's a little bit of fun to do, a rather boring job, and hopefully you get it done. Also think about when you have a new hire, especially like if it's a new supervisor or a new accounts payable manager, they might do the review as they're going through their training of the new in their new position. Okay, as we're coming down towards the end of our time together, let's go over real quickly, some best and some worst practice. So your policy should be written and detailed. Again, it can be a PDF or it can be printed. It needs to be shared with everyone who needs it. It's not just the manager only, because don't forget, a PDF can be shared with everyone, updated on a regular basis whenever there's a change. Also, if you have a problem, if you have a major problem, like God forbid a fraud, but maybe a lot of duplicate payments, you want to identify where the weakness is in your process, make the change, and then update your policy. And then your annual review. Some worst practices, not having a written policy, not making sure that your policy conforms to all legal and regulatory requirements. It's one thing not to put best practices in your policy and procedures manual because you're not using them. It's another thing to have a policy and procedure, a policy or a procedure that does not conform to IRS guidelines for, let's say, information reporting, for expense reporting, for your state unclaimed property or sales and use tax, etc. And just keep in mind, I know you don't want to hear this, but more and more states are starting to have their own 1099 reporting requirements that may or may not be the same as the federal. Also, never reviewing and assuming that you have no changes because everybody changes, okay? And then, of course, taking somebody else's policy without making major modifications. Because when you take someone else's policy, that's what you have. Someone else's policy. That's all you have. Concluding thoughts, and then any more comments from you guys. Don't forget, your manual is a guidebook for your accounts payable operations, the way it operates. If you create it effectively, it can not only document what you've been doing, it can be useful as a training guide, and also your supervisors and even your processes should be using it as a reference guide when they have a question about how something should be done. And if you're you're conforming to the state or federal guidelines, you may even be able to get it to help you shorten an audit. And in my mind, anything that can be done to shorten an audit is a good thing.